Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Some people are still joining, but I'm going to start already a bit with some introduction. Today, we'll talk about lessons from XWiki, building sustainable open source software. In this webinar, after a short introduction, I will talk about XWiki, the product, the open source software, and the relationship between the open source project and the company. And then we'll continue talking about funding open source, how we fund all this open source development. We'll also talk about security at XWiki, how we handle security in the community and in the company, and the recent ISO 27001 certification that we got. And then I'll talk about the next steps for the product. And at the end, as I've already mentioned, I will answer all your questions that I haven't answered yet. My name is Michael Hamann. I'm a senior research and development engineer at XWiki, or in short, I'm a software developer, living and working in Karlsruhe in Germany. I've actually been contributing to open source for around 20 years now. And then after starting contributing to open source, I studied computer science at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology and also did a PhD there. And after that, I basically made my dream come true of working full-time on open source by joining the product team of XWiki SRS in 2021, now almost 5 years ago. XWiki SRS is the home of XWiki and CryptPad. I will talk more about XWiki in a moment. CryptPad is actually quite known. It's an end-to-end encrypted collaborative suite that came out of a research project. Yeah, XWiki SRS was founded 22 years ago and is developing open source software as an independent company in France and Romania. There are no outside investors, at least not significant. And we have now more than 75 employees, most of them remote first, some also in office in France and Romania. And besides developing these open source software solutions, we are providing support, training, and consulting and hosting in the EU for our clients for both XWiki and CryptPad. Now let's talk about what is XWiki. XWiki is a collaboration and knowledge management software. It exists since 2003, so a tiny bit before the company was founded, that supports its development. XWiki is a structured open source enterprise wiki, meaning you have pages, you can structure them in a hierarchical tree, as you can see here on the left, and you can have links between pages, you have history, etc., what you expect from a wiki, basically. And in addition to that, you also have structured data, which allows you to attach properties with a rich type system to pages, so you can have dates, numbers, users, relations to other pages, also further texts. And this basically allows you to develop small applications on top of XWiki, using XWiki as a platform for developing web applications. This can be both as a proper, I would say, application with real code, or you can also just drag and drop your properties together in our app within minutes wizard, creating small applications, for example, for managing an IT inventory in minutes, as the name says. All of this is 100% open source, licensed under the LGPL license, which gives you the freedom to choose where you deploy it. You can deploy it on premise, on your infrastructure, wherever you want, or XWiki SRS also offers a cloud if you don't want to handle the deployment here yourself. If you're currently on another solution, we also have migrations available, in particular from Confluence, the biggest competition, I would say. But we also have migrators for other solutions like MediaWiki. XWiki is part of OpenDesk, more on that in a moment, and it's also part of the Nextcloud Hub. Right from the start, there was a separation between the company XWiki SAS on xwiki.com and the open source project on xwiki.org. So we have two websites, and this is not just two websites, but it's also a real separation in governance. The company doesn't own the code. There is no contributor license agreement that would give the company, for example, special rights on community contributions. And all decisions in the open source project are taken by the so-called committers. The committer concept is inspired by the projects of the Apache Software Foundation, committers are basically the maintainers of the project and those who decide, and decisions are taken with votes. And also the committers decide who becomes a committer by voting. So somebody who's starting XWiki SAS, even in the product team, is not automatically a committer, but first needs to gain the trust of the existing committers to be voted to become a committer and thereby maintainer of the software. Companies that employ at least one committer are so-called sponsoring companies. Sponsoring companies have certain rights, like being mentioned on a community website and to basically advertise the services. And the top sponsoring company has some more options. For example, advertising its paid extensions. I will talk about that also later on the community website and also in the extension manager in the software itself. And yeah, there are things like news in the software, etc. But all of this is governed by the community rules that are made to be independent of XWiki SAS. However, the truth is also that at the moment XWiki SAS is the only sponsoring company. So in fact, a lot of development and community governance is kind of controlled by the company. Still, we try to really uphold the separation. And in particular, also our CTO is quite strict in this direction and also helps us by reminding us frequently about the separation that helps a lot to make this happen in reality and not just on paper. Now, how we fund all this open source development that I've just shown. As I've said already at the start, basically Ludovic Dubost, who created XWiki the software, created also the company and tried to finance the development first with service. This is the yellow part that you can see here. These are service sales, like customization, custom projects on top of XWiki. Then XWiki also relied in particular here in the first, actually quite some years on research funding. This is this violet part, and also CRR, this is a French thing. These are basically tax rebates for research. You can see here it's after it's growing quite well initially, the revenue, and tends to cover the spending. This is the screen line, but it's quite slowing down a lot, and in particular the recurring revenue here from support becomes quite flat, even going down at around 35% of the revenue, or 800k euros per year. Why is this a problem? When you want to fund open source, and in particular open source maintenance, services, customizations, and research projects rarely fund maintenance work, like security. It's the exception that some project really gives you funding for this. So for funding all this maintenance work that still needs to be done, recurring revenue from support is key. And for this, of course, a question is, why should a user pay if your whole product is open source and free to use? So why should you get a support contract if you can also just use it and ask your questions on the community forum? And one answer that was found around 2017 are paid extensions. The idea of paid extensions in XWiki is that paid extensions are still open source, but they include a check for a license key. So while in theory you have the full source and you could remove the license check, this is not what companies, for example, are doing, because you want to use the product as it is and you don't want to mess around with it. On the other hand, of course, the paid license is not just a hindrance, it also includes the support, so you have a real benefit from it. And on the other hand, these paid extensions are designed to support our support contracts by being included in these support contracts. So they give a lot more value to these support contracts. And we can see here now the numbers again up to now, since 2012, that indeed the recurring revenue here, this blue line, and here it's split into more subcategories, is going up here again, but it's still growing a bit slowly. And then during the pandemic, it went up and it got really a big boost recently, reaching 50% recurring revenue at 2.5 million recurring revenue, yearly revenue in 2024. So what drove this recent boost? It's not just paid extensions. You can see paid extensions alone here in yellow. As I said, this is not the full story, or they provide value to our support contract. So it's that they fund more, kind of, but still there is another story. And this story is two parts. The first part is digital sovereignty. The second part is Atlassian. On that in a moment. Recently, here in Europe, there has been a lot of focus on sovereign and open source solutions. And this is because open source provides you true control. Nobody can just cancel your software from today to tomorrow. And even if they did, another vendor could take over with open source. And also you have full transparency on the software that is deployed. XWiki is part of the Open Desk project of the German government that was funded to develop a sovereign and open source alternative to proprietary solutions like Office 365. And how this project works is that it's basically combining a lot of existing open source solutions and open source vendors like Element, Nextcloud, Univention, Nordic, Open Project, Open Exchange, Collabora Online, and us, XWiki. And they are combined in one solution, also by developing integrations between the software. And actually, it's not just in the project, but it's also outside this project. This project has initiated a lot of collaboration between XWiki and other software vendors like Open Project, Nextcloud, and Collabora Online in particular to develop integrations and to work together. Why should we do this? Well, in some part, we are actually competing with Open Project now because we have a task manager. So we have a task management solution. Open Project has one. And Open Project actually has a wiki in their task management solution. But the fact is, and the truth that we simply can't replace a full task manager, and Open Project cannot really replace a full wiki solution. So for us, it makes a lot of sense to work together and to develop nice integrations so our solutions can be used together. And not just that, the idea is also really to do projects together to provide an integrated solution. Atlassian, as I've already mentioned, has also made us a huge favor in some way. Their products, Confluence and Jira, are widely used as knowledge management and task management solutions. And what Atlassian did is, on the one hand, they increased prices a lot, more than doubling their prices, and they push their clients to the cloud. First, in 2024, they discontinued their server products. And now they announced that in 2029, the only remaining on-premise product, the Atlassian Data Center product, will be discontinued. There might be 3 more years of extended maintenance, but then it's the end. So everybody who doesn't want to switch to the cloud or cannot switch to the cloud for different reasons is now looking for an alternative, and this creates a huge surge of interest to switch to open source. Another topic in this regard is even AI training. Atlassian even announced doing AI training on client data, which further drives people to find alternatives. We had a first migration solution already for years, actually, as a simple community migration tool that allowed you to convert the structure and the syntax, basically, but it required the help of an XWiki expert to use it, really, even for small migrations. Still, this first solution allowed us to collect experiences and to see the first migration challenges like macro compatibility, and allowed us to develop the first solutions to replace Confluence macros by direct equivalents in XWiki. And also first migrations that we did for some clients allowed us to co-finance the migration improvements. This took then really off during the past 2 years with larger migrations, in particular the European Parliament with 15K users and 1,000 spaces, and BMC with 150K users and 3,000 spaces on 2 instances. This kind of scale required that we really industrialize the migration process, as at this scale you can no longer migrate each space manually or check each result page manually. So what we did is that we further extended first developed and then extended and perfected our migration assistant that performs most of the migration work. It imports the page structure, attachments, handles the history of pages, the links between pages and spaces in particular, also when they're imported after each other, and of course converting the syntax. And it's not just that, it's also creating extensive reports that allow you to see which macros were converted, which macros couldn't be converted because there is no equivalent, which pages caused errors, etc. So you can have confidence into the result that you get from this migration. The problem with the migration is that the devil is as so frequently in the details. Knowledge management solutions are not all the same. They don't handle the data the same way. And as so frequent, getting the last 20% right is 80% of the work. Organizations structure their knowledge in many different ways and use the software in many different ways. Also, Confluence has a lot of different extensions and macros. XWiki too, but they are not the same. The 2 solutions exist since almost the same year. It's like 1 year after each other they were created. So they developed in parallel, both inspired basically by the same wiki ideas, but still developing differently. XWiki is not a Confluence clone in that sense. So some things just work differently. One example, for example, is also access rights. both support access rights in complex ways, but it's different. So the migration needs to perform a mapping between access rights in Confluence to access rights in XWiki. With all these migrations that we've already performed for clients, we learned a lot what can be simply migrated already and what still needs manual work. So when we are approached with a migration project, the first step is a diagnosis step to gather information about the context in which XWiki is used, the configuration, the size, the macros that are used, the plugins and features, the authentication, etc. And then we can see if this is a case that we can already handle well, or actually that our existing migration solution can already handle well. Then it's a simple case that can be basically handled autonomically by the organization that wants to perform the migration, basically independently deciding on the migration plan and then performing the migration using the migration wizard, optionally using some consulting hours for some consulting. And the other case is that when we see, okay, this is a more complex case, then we can perform an analysis mission where we collaborate with key stakeholders to define the scope and also do a more detailed audit how everything is used and what macros exist, what extensions exist, how they can be mapped, which parts need to be migrated automatically, which can maybe be handled manually, etc. And then creating a migration roadmap and also checking which gaps exist. We have already performed an extensive gap analysis between Confluence and XWiki to really be able to tell clients where the gaps are and where we might still need to develop something. And then we deliver the migration, possibly containing enhancements, custom macros, etc., and deliver this. As I've already mentioned, we're also working together with Open Project. Since 2024, we have a commercial partnership, and we are now also able to offer a migration to XWiki and Open Project together as an open source alternative stack to Atlassian. And actually, yesterday, a more extensive integration between XWiki and Open Project has also been released. Further, we are working with TOSIT, the Open Source I Trust, a French organization of some big companies there, to further enhance this integration and also to further close some gaps between Confluence and XWiki. By the way, I'm always talking about gaps. It's true, there are gaps, but there are actually also features in XWiki that have no equivalent in Confluence. So they're really two different solutions. It's just when you come from Confluence, many people experience that, okay, this is not there. So there is a gap, but there's also the other side. I think I'll answer the question at the end because it's not really related to what I'm now talking about. And I'll first talk now about security, and then I can come back to questions, also going more details about XWiki. So how are we handling security? As I've mentioned, we have this split between community and company, and the split is also reflected in our security organization. The community has processes that are defined by a community security policy that lives in our wiki on xwiki.org, and changes to this policy are decided by the committers that I've already mentioned. And the main task, I would say, regarding security for the community is to develop and release security fixes and create security advisories, and of course, in general, pay attention to the security of the software, making sure that it's secure and uses secure dependencies. On the other side, the company has its own security processes that are managed inside the company. And those, or at least parts of these security processes, are triggered by the community processes. For example, when a critical vulnerability is reported or a new security fix is created, there are processes how to respond to these events. And then there are, of course, also events that originate more directly in the company, like security incidents or direct reports of security vulnerabilities, for example, by clients. The main mission of the company here is, of course, to protect its clients. But that's only the one side. The other side is also towards the community to ensure that the community processes match the security requirements of the clients. I now want to explain parts of the security processes in more details to give you a bit of an insight how this works. In the community, the main process for handling a security vulnerability is that the vulnerability is reported. Either there's a manual report by some person, or there are also automated reports basically by the scan results of Sonar, which we use for static code analysis, or by the CVE scan of dependencies that we perform as part of every CI build. When a vulnerability is confirmed by a committer, we develop then a fix. For this, we have private chats and a private forum to discuss the solution, and we have private forks to collaborate on developing the fix. Then we merge the fix, trying to hide the security sensitivity a bit by not making it too obvious. This is similar to what, for example, the Linux kernel does. And this is then the latest point at which we create also a draft advisory. So a security advisory, just not public yet. And we are notifying the security members. These are mainly the sponsoring company, but also some other people that we deemed trusted enough that we notify them about the security fix. And then we release fixed versions with a note in the release note that it contains security fixes, but without any details. The idea is that this gives then admins time to upgrade their wikis. Before then, after 3 months after the last release, we release the security, we publish the security advisory and the original report to provide then full transparency. In the company itself, again, some parts of the processes is that information about these draft security advisories are pulled from the community. We are computing which clients are affected based on the versions they are using or the extensions they are using. What I'm talking about doesn't only affect XWiki itself, but also the extensions that are maintained by the committers. Some extensions are maintained by some committers, to be precise. And the company also informs on-premise clients about security updates, and the cloud clients are updated if possible. In some cases, upgrades are not possible when instances are highly customized. XWiki is highly customizable, and some parts of that could break on upgrades. In such cases, or in some such cases, we're also delivering patches depending on the contract with the client. And of course, we are trying to plan upgrade projects and deliver them to make sure that clients are on a supported version. For some critical vulnerabilities, we are also trying to deploy workarounds like blocking certain requests, if this is possible. Yeah, all of this existed for years, basically, and grew more efficient and also sophisticated during the years. But today, many companies or clients, companies which are clients, do not only ask about the security of the code itself, but the demand is now to need to prove that the security of the whole software factory, from the workstation of the developer to the final artifact, going through secure coding techniques, secure CI tools, and etc. So to satisfy these demands, we got an ISO 27001 certification in May. This certification covers in particular the cloud and support offering of the company, but avoids to directly impact the development of the software in the community. Still, it is kind of impacting it, which, as I mentioned, it's about the whole thing, not just the final software. So what we implemented is that the development of the software is monitored by the company, basically. There is an internal organization agreement, the organization service level agreement, that specifies requirements regarding the development of the software, like security trainings, secure coding standards, code reviews, etc. And there is an annual audit to check if those requirements are followed. Further, there's a point of contact between the company and the XWiki community, which is a committer employed by XWiki SAS, who reports if the community strategy matches the internal agreement or not, or the requirements of this agreement, so the company can react accordingly. AI is a big topic right now, also in security. We are also seeing this in two aspects. On the one hand, we see more vulnerabilities reported by external reporters, some obviously using AI. And also we had an employee, or have, who used AI to find candidate security vulnerabilities and then manually confirmed and reported them, leading also to a large number of reports. And to handle all this, we are working a lot on security right now. And as I've mentioned, recurring revenue is really what allows us to finance all this work. So, but that's not the only thing we're working on. We're also working on a number of different topics that I want to mention here. We're working on integrating the block node editor as a block-based editor to replace the quite old WYSIWYG editor of XWiki by a more modern alternative that is also adopted by some other members of OpenDesk, also with the goal of providing a more unified editing experience. Then we're working on modernizing XWiki's whole UI, which is a huge project for several years, with the so-called Crystal project that you can see here as a small glimpse, basically, which provides a completely new UI as more of a single-page application instead of a traditional web application as XWiki is. And then, last but not least, AI is also a topic in knowledge management itself. We have released the first MCP server this week with search, read, and edit tools that allows you to connect your AI agent with XWiki. More documentation on that will follow, and also more tools and etc. will follow in the following weeks and months. XWiki also has a simple AI chat, which we might also extend to a full agent, but that of course also depends on funding, what our clients want to have and want to support with their money, basically. That's it from my side for now. Now I'll try to answer some of your questions. I think I'll start with the first question that has been asked in the chat. So the question is that the file system is used to store user data, and if there are any plans to move this into the database instead. So the answer is yes and no. It's a bit more complicated. XWiki has a database. Actually, you can choose your database. Common choices are MariaDB or Postgres. And we store in the database basically page contents and just whole structured data. This is all already in the database. What's not in the database at this point are attachments that you attach to pages and extensions, and also some logs, for example, of when you go on statuses when you execute jobs. On this remaining file system part, our answer is not moving this all into the database. In fact, attachments in the database were a thing many years ago, actually. Instead, what we did last year, actually, I worked on that mostly, is to move all this data into an object storage, at least the data that made sense. Some data will also move to the database, but big stuff like attachments will move into an S3 compatible object store. This is already available since XWiki 17.10, but I was not too careful. Actually, I assumed a bit that every alternative to S3 supported more complex features, and it turns out they don't. So we will need to work a bit more on that to make it compatible and widely available. What we have right now is concerning attachments. It's still not extensions and not some other stuff that is still in the file system. I hope we will be able to work on this in the second half of this year, but it's hard to promise stuff. Yeah. Also, given that we have also many other things to work on, last but not least, also security. And yeah, the question is also if this would be able to create a real application farm. So application farm, I think, refers more to, I'm not sure there's Hazelcast mentioned, but to be honest, I'm not familiar with Hazelcast. What I can tell you is XWiki supports clustering, so that you can have several XWiki instances running on several servers that store the same data basically and talk to a common database. And actually, it's not just a database. You also need to talk to a common server, which we use for search. But this is supported. This works well. And those instances talk to each other to synchronize caches, etc. This exists. We're using this, for example, on xwiki.org. There we have a cluster of 2 instances. This is working and provides some redundancy. So this works. How this works today before object storage is basically with a shared file system. And what we are working on also for the OpenDesk use case is to get rid of this shared file system requirement and to only rely on the database and the object store for storing shared data. Okay, there is a question, how many Confluence migrations proportion required consulting? To be honest, I'm not sure. I can't answer this. Maybe, yeah, Stefana is writing. Maybe she has, she is more knowledgeable on this topic than I. So we mostly deal with those clients, I think, that need consulting because that's what we do with them. So we might not know every case of an organization that migrated on its own. And we have 1.5K organizations that we believe migrated according to, I'll let you know on the chat. Yeah, you can follow the chat and I will try reading it in a moment. And we offered migration services to about 200 to 300 organizations in terms of support or consulting. Yeah. then there were some questions that you can see in the shared notes also that were shared with us as part of the registration. The first XWiki was mentioned as an alternative to Confluence, so I was curious about the capabilities is the question. Yeah, comparing Confluence and XWiki, I think they have largely similar capabilities, or at least you will find most capabilities that Confluence has in XWiki. There are differences in the write system, I would say, how it works. Another thing is XWiki has native translations of pages, for example, which, as far as I'm aware, doesn't exist in that same way in Confluence. There are translations, but it's different. We have a strong concept of structured data and application wizards, which is also something you won't find in this exact form in Confluence. Apart from that, you have macros, you have a WYSIWYG editor, you have users, you have writes, you have spaces. In XWiki, you have real nested spaces, so you have a full hierarchy, where Confluence has a more flat hierarchy, where the hierarchy inside a space, so the nested hierarchy in a space that you see is more a virtual hierarchy. I would say that basically it's not a real hierarchy, but just, the pages are not that properly nested. They just appear nested. Where in XWiki you have a real hierarchy, and you can also put writes, for example, on lower levels of the hierarchy. There are certainly gaps. If you're interested in more details, I would suggest to drop us an email and to talk to our sales. They might tell you more about the specific gaps, and there is also a gap report that we did for the European Parliament that can be shared with at least in some cases. As I've said, I'm a developer, not a salesperson, so I might not be familiar with every detail. Then there is a question coming more to the security topics. So how do you think CRA will impact open source communities that rely on few active maintainers whenever there's a critical exploitable vulnerability detected? What best practices should organizations follow to mitigate such risk? To be honest, I'm not perfectly sure what organization refers in this question. In general, as far as I'm aware, I'm not a lawyer, is CRA won't really directly impact open source communities, only organizations that actually sell the software. But of course, if there is an open source community and then the software is sold, the whole impact is on who is selling the software. And so assuming the organization is selling the software and wants to mitigate the risk of the community, I think what I would suggest here is really following the best practices that has been established, like making sure you fund open source projects you depend on. See if there is a support offering by the community. As a community, of course, you could think about offering support contracts. Now, this in particular with CIA, this might not be something you want to do because it creates a lot of responsibilities. So I think you need to be careful as an open source community not to create more work than it solves. What I think is an interesting concept is that there are commercial entities that work with open source communities to provide these services. So there is an example in the Java ecosystem in which we operate, XWiki is written in Java mostly, is Open Elements. They are providing consulting and support for key elements of the Java ecosystem, like really Maven, JUnit, these really widely used libraries, also Apache Commons, and then also offering support for fulfilling all the requirements of CIA. And they work with the open source communities. They employ maintainers and have contracts with maintainers to work with them. And they also have their own people who can also support the communities with security work, with maintaining long-term support branches, and all the stuff that is not really fun but needs to be done. So I think establishing such structures is what I would recommend. And then, of course, if you rely on some open source software, you need to use them and support those open source communities. What we do at XWiki, for example, is we have the so-called FOSS fund, where we donate 1% of our recurring revenue to open source projects we use either internally or externally or in the software. How does XWiki handle with open source security compliance? I'm not exactly sure what open source security compliance in this context means. As I've said, we have these frameworks. We also, of course, check dependencies before we adopt the dependency. We check, for example, that it is actively maintained. It's ideally not a single person who is maintaining it. And it has been around for some time, so we can expect maintenance. And yeah, we have lots of rules and we do lots of stuff. To be fair, we are currently not formally certified with these open chain certifications, for example. It's probably something we should look into. I think for most things we are following them, but it's certainly possible that there are still gaps. And the last question is a bit similar. Do you have internal processes for handling open source's cybersecurity in place? It's not fully clear to me what open source cybersecurity here refers to. If the person who asks this is here, maybe you can also clarify this. As I said, we have security processes and they apply to closed source as well as open source software in some sense. Like, yeah, we're monitoring for updates. We're monitoring for vulnerabilities that are reported. We're checking open source dependencies. There's always more you can do. And it's always, of course, also a question what you can prioritize and what you need to deliver to clients, etc. There are always trade-offs. Yeah, I hope that answers it a bit. Okay, Stefana answers that she has rechecked in the past 5 years. I'm just reading it for the recording. There are about 1,500 organizations that we know of that migrated. Out of these, we offered support services to 400 organizations, and we executed or assisted 100 migrations. And the migration projects range from small 50 gigabyte instances to very large 3 terabyte instances with millions of page revisions. So to summarize, basically, we executed or assisted about 1 out of 15 migrations. So now the vast majority of migrations are executed without our assistance. Okay, thank you, Stefano, for these details. Yeah, I'm checking, but I think there are no more questions. Then let me come to the summary of this webinar. As I've shown in XWiki, we have established a separation between the company and the open source project. And this, I think, can create room for the community while still having good security processes. as we've seen, it might need a bit more creative constructs, but it works. We found that paid extensions bring value to support contracts and allow us to keep everything open source without having closed source extensions or open core or whatever models others do. We found that collaboration with other projects like Open Project is key to succeed and also to win clients together. And what is driving our growth at the moment is really digital sovereignty and confluence migrations, which really create a surge of interest. If you have any more questions, feel free to write us an email at contact@xwiki.com, and you can find out more about the product, about the open source software and the community at xwiki.org. And if you're interested in the services by the company, you can find them at xwiki.com. Thank you very much for your attention.